So move. Support.
Okay, this is, right.
I
Bob.
moved.
Okay.
I supported. Jordan support.
Yes.
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 Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Witt,
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes. Do you need a moment or two to handle technology, Amanda? No, good, thank you. Then we'll move to new business. The first item is review of the suggested changes for our bylaws and also the policies, which we'll discuss. I submitted in our board packet a copy of a marked up draft of the bylaws that we had, we received the draft from our council. And I had asked any of the board members to forward to me any questions or suggestions, and I included those marked in red so that you can see what was suggested. The first question came up with a matter of timing. New board members are appointed on for service beginning April 1st. Our first regular meeting is scheduled normally for the fourth Friday of the month. So there's a possibility that for 3.5 weeks, we might not have officers empowered to serve, or their terms of appointment might have expired on March 31st. And therefore, they would no longer be able to serve during the month of April until we have new officers appointed. So several suggestions. One would be to extend the term of officers until the replacements were appointed at the regularly scheduled meeting, the end of the month. But then we would have the possibility of a director fulfilling their 3-year term on March 31st, but still be expected to continue their duties while they're no longer a director. So that presents a problem. The other solution, as I think was Sylvia, you mentioned, the county commissioners just have an organizational meeting the first week in January, which is when their appointments begin. So I penciled in here that we could have a special organizational meeting of the board in April of each year. And we can schedule that depending on calendar, within the first couple of days of April, have a special meeting for organization, elect officers, any changes to committee appointments could be made at that time. And so the committees could function during the month of April until our first regular scheduled board meeting. So if anybody has any comments or suggestions on that proposed change.
We also have legal counsel online for
Mhm.
those. And Tom, I don't know if I have an electronic version of this I can send to him. So maybe after we're done.
Yeah, after.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So, but Neil is here. If people had a question, or Neil, if you had feedback until what was just said, feel free to jump in. But I think you were looking on the second page. Is that where you were
Yes.
talking?
Under Article 5, officers and selection thereof.
Correct. My only thought on that is Article 13 says a quorum is half the board. And I don't know that we would ever be in a position where we wouldn't have a quorum of the board that, where the board itself would be absent a quorum to be able to make decisions during that time frame.
I didn't think of that.
So are you proposing then that to not worry about it, but if something came up and it was needed, then you'd pull like a special emergency meeting and handle the
Correct.
matter.
Correct.
Yeah, that's possible too.
Just for a simplicity's sake.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the session, let's say that I'm the chair and my term expires on March 31st and I'm not reappointed or not able to be reappointed. The vice chair could take over on April 1st and continue handling responsibilities. There is an outside possibility, both the chair and vice chair could be no longer serving on April 1st. So then the board would have to call a special meeting and hopefully there'd be a quorum to appoint a new chair and vice chair.
Right, the special meeting provision, right above Article 13 on quorum provides that a majority, it's chair can call it, vice chair can call it, or by a majority of the board can call a special meeting. So again, to the extent that there was a situation in the outside chance both the chair and the vice chair's term ended, we would still have the ability for the whole board to call a special meeting to address anything that arose.
Yeah, the other thing that just occurred to me too is that this is April and right now, maybe not all of us are affected by having kids who have spring break, but it is a spring break week too. So, you know, that could, if we're saying we're going to do this every year, that could prove to be more difficult.
So what would be the most logical recommendation, Neil, to fix this? Leave it alone with the provision, or what would you recommend?
I'd recommend leaving it alone. And my reasoning is that we always have the ability for a special meeting to be called should something arise that needs to be addressed. But the likelihood of something happening in this situation is low. And a regular meeting, I don't know, a standing meeting every year, I don't know that that's feasible or even necessary, given that you still have a quorum and an ability to call a special meeting should something warrant immediate attention.
So the only other thing I can think of would be, since we're moving to an authority status, the chair will sign all of the contracts, correct? Would that be an issue if there's no chair and no vice chair for signing contracts between April 20, whatever, 25, 26, whenever that meeting is?
So the executive director, the board kind of approves the overall. Article 10 relating to contracts, I would say two things. One, contracts normally most of this is going to come up October 1 with the fiscal year switch. The second is that Article 10 addresses a lot of the contracting authority, and going through that, the executive director, you can provide authority for that, and the executive director has the authority to select and engage contractors. And so I don't know that it is a board function. Under this set of the bylaws, the executive director has that authority to kind of manage the day-to-day operations.
Sure. For the Board of Commissioners, our county administrator, he has authority with some parameters to do that as well. But when it comes to actually signing, the dotted line for approval, the board chair does that. So I don't.
Yeah, he's been ratifying, not signing.
Ratifying, sure. Thank you.
So are we looking at then that being a structural change that will happen with the authority where our contracts will no longer need to be signed by a board chair, but that because that authority is given to Dr. Brishiers, he is able to just fully facilitate that contract signing?
Because right now, since we're a county department, the commission board chair signs the contracts, correct?
Yeah, but it's more,
Ratifies them.
yeah. That's to be determined. a lot of CMH's executive director has the authority to do that. The board is informed of the contracts. They approve the overall budget and function that way. It's really up to this board if you want to add the extra signature on that, more of a awareness or ratification. But in our finance committee and our process, you'll always see new contracts that come in. They get presented here, but the actual signature in a lot of CMH is not required by either or. It's just the executive directors, whatever this board would like to do as it relates to that. But to me, the board chair would be ratifying and not approval.
And I'm fine if we don't have that. I'm just trying to think
Yeah.
through what
Intent
could
to
happen
issue.
if we don't have a chair
Hmm.
for a month.
Right.
But I think typically for most county departments, the county commission board chair only signs them when he's in the building once or maybe twice a month anyways. So it probably most of it could wait until we have that first April meeting.
Correct.
But I'm just trying to think through.
Yeah, that's a valid, but it leads into the types of process changes moving to authority we would do. And that is a significant one. I mean, my recommendation is I would rather have the board chair ratify these. And if there's an issue with delay, it can just be, it doesn't stop the contract from being executed. That extra level of oversight, to be honest with you.
There actually are two parallel documents. One is the bylaws and the other one is the board policies. And today we're talking about the bylaws. The bylaws, Article 15 on execution of instruments says that the board shall have the authority to designate other officers or agents who shall have the authority to execute any instrument on behalf of the authority. So under policies, we could cover that when we get to it.
Yes.
By, and there, I think there was a provision somewhere, I can't find it right now, that in the absence of the executive director to sign a contract, the board chair and board secretary are authorized to sign contracts. So there are ways perhaps to handle that.
Yeah, and what I'm going to recommend with board policy review is that we actually have a work session for those
Mhm.
instead of trying to do that here. Because a lot of those haven't been updated in over a decade. So we can tackle some of that there. But I know personally, I'd like to be able to obviously execute the contracts, but I do like the extra level of signature of the board chair as part of we'll call it semi-ratification process.
Mhm.
And we can address in the policy. I think that's wise. Because the full board sees them and they'll know in finance committee and all that, but even though it might not be required, it's something that I'd recommend.
And the bylaws do allow for the executive director to execute contracts consistent with the approved budget that are necessary for the ordinary conduct of business. So forget services right now. You know, if you want to switch telephone providers and you need a contract signed, you should have the authority to do
Correct.
that as long as there's no substantial.
Yeah, it's an extra level of oversight, but you approve the budget, which will, right? So we keep showing you financials that have a deficit in them, right? So I've been really scrutinizing new contracts as they come in, knowing that it may or may not increase the deficit. So I like that extra level because if it's just awareness and oversight that we have, because if not, you approve a budget this year, and then like, if I'm already at that budget limitation, what happens to any new contract that's needed? So I intend to deal with that in the policy discussion, but there is a real thing. And so I like that extra level of, and I think that we'll work out in the policy kind of review on it. I like having the board chair signature line on those, as long as it doesn't block the execution of them. The board is approving them, and then the execution, kind of the ratification process, just the due diligence that, even though it may not be required, I'd recommend.
And we do have the establishment of committees as part of the bylaws, and the committees can be, like Finance Committee can be delegated to review all proposed contracts, make a recommendation to the board.
Correct.
So we do have procedures in place that
Yep.
facilitate that.
Yep. So I would take Neil's advice on what we just said, and then we'll address some of this in policy.
Okay, so.
I did have a kind of like a change I'd like to bring up right off the top. Our new name and what our tax ID number is actually Ottawa County Community Mental Health Authority, not CMH of Ottawa County,
Mhm.
right? So it says what the name of the authority shall be. When we were doing this, we didn't know how it was going to play out, right? So it's literally going to be Ottawa County Community Mental Health Authority. Right?
Yes, and we're gonna
Mhm.
do Ottawa.
Right. So we'll have to make some
As of-
changes.
As of
Well, it'd be 10-1.
10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Right. So that's the change we'll have to make on these.
So to get back to this first proposed change, we will strike at a special meeting and leave it as is. Will be held at a meeting of the board in April of each year, and then handle anything unusual on an ad hoc basis.
Mhm.
Okay. The next proposed change was in that same section with officers. Um, The chairperson may not serve as an officer of the board for a period of the way that reads is strange. The exiting chairperson may not serve as an officer of the board for a period of 1 year. Uh, One way of doing that is provide an escape route, or we can just wait and deal with it on an ad hoc basis. An escape route would be adding, unless approved by 2/3 majority vote of the board. There's a possibility the chair might be the ideal candidate to serve as the secretary. Right now, that would be prohibited. And we could either build in a mechanism for handling that with a supermajority, or we could just not include it and deal with it when it comes up and let the board make an errata decision.
People's thoughts on that?
You
I
would
don't
be
think-
amending the bylaws in that situation.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, all of
Meaning,
them or?
like, my thought is, you would have to follow the amendment process in the bylaws if you were going to allow the immediate past chairperson to then serve on the board in some capacity. And that requires, meeting notice, at least 30 days in things like that. So I'm not saying yay or nay, that this is your choice. What I'm saying is if you are thinking that is something you do want, I think it would be, rather than going through the process of a process of an amendment to then include that provision, I think the better course would be to do it now as opposed to, waiting for that ad hoc situation.
I agree.
Okay.
I guess I don't necessarily think that should be a supermajority vote. Personally, I think that the board should be able to elect whoever it wants to be chair. And we do that by majority at the beginning of a term. For a normal chair, somebody's doing a really good job. I don't know why we would make them have a higher threshold to continue serving as chair. If the will of the board is to have them continue serving, they should be able to do that. Personally. So I'd be fine changing this to simple majority rather than 2/3.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to that either. Do we currently have a time limit for how long you can be chair? Or is this same person?
3 terms,
3 terms, okay.
actually 3 consecutive terms. And then you could stay off for a year and then be considered again.
Okay. So this would be mostly talking about if you'd hit those 3 years, and then you wanted a different position or to be chair again.
The way I read it is it says, upon the completion of a term
Okay.
as chairperson, the exiting chairperson may not serve a consecutive term unless approved by a 2/3 majority.
That's right. So I could serve as a chair for 1 year, decide not to seek that position again.
Right.
Or the board could decide they want somebody else to be chair, but they may say, well, make me the vice chair.
Sure.
Mhm.
And right now.
Require a 2/3 vote under this.
Yeah.
Because that's still an officer.
Mhm.
I
Right.
agree that I don't think it should take 2/3.
Yeah, I think it's a
Okay.
majority.
So we could strike the 2/3 and just by a majority vote of the board.
It's more likely that you'll be elected by majority to keep serving forever,
That's where I'm going.
want to or not. Ever say aye, aye, right?
There, done.
There is burnout.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's the most likely,
Mhm. Someone raised a question on page 3, Article 9B and C. That's where we're talking about, we do a needs assessment report, an annual plan and request for new funds for the authority submitted to MDHHS. And then the next provision, C, says we also submit that request for new funds to the commissioners. And someone raised a question as to whether or not that was appropriate or
yeah,
possible.
it's required. So, and we've never really aligned the needs report that we send to the state versus the needs report we present to county commissioners. And the state in the past has asked for certain information in a certain way that often doesn't reflect the actual needs of the county. For instance, being the 7th largest county, but getting very small amount of general fund, right? So it's both required, but I intend to align both those needs assessments so that the county understands what we're really facing and the state, in addition to what they require. But they're both necessary and required.
Dr. Bashirs, the question was about, does that request come from the board or from the CEO?
The request to, I'm sorry, to present,
For the funds, to support the needs assessment.
oh.
Worded that under duties of the board, the board is to request new funds from MDHSS.
Yeah, well, that is true, and I don't think we've ever formalized that. Like, ideally, I would present the needs assessment to you, who then would say, please submit on our behalf. So we could, because that is actually more powerful to have a CMH board making specific requests and probably statutorily more correct. I'll ask Neil to do that. It's been almost like this perfunctory thing that we send to the state. You got to send this in now, but it's never talked about, never discussed. In fact, in my 20-something years in the system, I've never once heard the state said, we got your needs assessment, let's talk about it and send you more funds. So I'm all in favor of interpreting this correctly, and Neil can weigh in a moment, but then actually moving towards where you as a board are in agreement with the needs assessment made by us by any means we do, community needs assessment, you know me, analysis, paralysis to death, all the analysis. I think I really like more of a formal process that's more in line with that. But Neil, your thoughts, as it's both required, but who makes the request to the state? We've been doing it on your behalf. It's really kind of how it's been happened. But I don't think, do you recall us saying, here's the exact needs assessment and how much I think it would cost, more money we need for general fund? Because that's what it's really focused on is general fund. The Medicaid side, you hear ad nauseum through the regional entity discussions and things like that and the white papers I write every month. But I think that was back in the day of general fund primarily funding the system. That was the needs assessment was part of that. Neil, do I have that right, or am I making up stuff at this point?
You have it right. So NCL 330.1226 B says that the board submits it to the department. And I do agree that it coming from the board carries more weight and kind of significance. And so, yes, it is part of that overall structure.
Yeah, and we've been doing it at practice, but never formally. I mean, I'd like to formalize it where there's a motion to accept the needs assessment as presented by staff to send to the state on our behalf. So we can, because I don't think we've done it that way. We've said, here's the needs assessment. You've been in receipt of it. But now that I'm thinking, I don't think I've ever written a formal letter to the state based on the needs assessment. I'm requesting this additional GF funding or whatever as based on it. And to date, I've never seen communication back and forth. But I think it's time we up the ante. I don't know, Paul, have you ever seen it? I can't remember. You know, when you look at the mental health code, remember this thing was written before Medicaid became the primary funding source for CMH. So and it was really a lot more of a partnership of the county and the state, because it was almost all exclusively general fund primarily until about the mid-90s. So, but I'm all in favor of doing that and making that clear.
And as a point of clarification, this is not unique to being an authority status.
Correct.
It would apply the same as a county
Yes.
agency.
In fact, there are no unique authority status things besides an agency must follow county policy and procedure. There's very few different, you could just cover up, the requirements don't change much at all. It's really our obligation to partner with the county as an agency or a county department and follow county policy and procedure that's different, say, in our bylaws, recognizing that in policies that change, but every other requirement is almost identical.
And as an authority, just to restate it, we still come under the overview of the county commissioners relative.
They can
to
change their
finance.
mind anytime.
Yep, and the county is still responsible for reviewing our financial situation, right?
Well, we presented them annually, kind of annual report. They don't approve our budget anymore. Okay, but they do have the needs assessment, you do. And they're required to do the 10% county match. But that's about it. Now, our strategy for authority transition still has us connected to the county in meaningful ways, which I'll talk about in my director's report on update. We don't intend to say, wow, hey, we're done with that and move on. We believe in a strong and comprehensive relationship with the county moving forward.
Okay, any further questions or comments on that particular issue? Down in paragraph K of 9, duties of the board, appoint an executive director. I inserted in parens CEO because that's the title we have as a
Yeah.
board approved for our executive director. That may be unnecessary, but I thought just as a point of clarification, it would not hurt to identify your proper title that you work with.
Sure. The mental health code is clear that it's called executive director that serves as the chief executive or administrative officer of it. And I was talking to Neil this morning, and so Neil, I don't know if it hurts or makes it, like / serving as CEO, in there. But that's why when I was looking through this, there was no need to necessarily change it because it's just understood that the executive director under that title of mental health code will serve as the CEO. And so a lot of my counterparts in the state, they have both. The executive director / CEO. To me, I just put CEO so people get used to saying that, but the official mental health capacity is, it's both. Neil, did I get that right?
You did get it right. The mental health code references both. A lot of the powers and express references in other sections outside chapter 2 reference executive director. And so because of that, I think it's important to have executive director. If you like including, we could say appoint an executive director, comma, to serve as chief executive officer, comma, who meets the standards of training, et cetera.
I'd recommend that.
Okay. And then Article 10, the board shall appoint an executive director. We could do the same thing there to serve as CEO who meets the standards of training.
Yep.
The page 4, under the duties of the executive director, the first, second, third, the fourth full paragraph down, the executive director shall manage the day-to-day operations of the authority in accordance with board policies, the approved budget, and applicable law, and talks about executing contracts and instruments. There were some questions raised about that, and should we identify a maximum dollar figure that the executive director is authorized to execute without prior board approval? Our policy manual right now talks about the executive director under policy chapter 21, section 11. The executive director or designee is authorized to enter into approved contracts, and all contracts shall be approved by the CMH Board of Directors at the time of initiation and the time of renewal. We can address this as we get into a discussion about the policy, but just bear in mind that this portion of the proposed bylaws does state the basic standards and subject to board policies, and we can address board policies later.
Yeah, and I'll have some recommendations based on what's occurring around the state to possible thresholds to consider.
The next comment that was submitted, page 5, Article 9 on committees. It was suggested maybe we add committees of the board shall elect a chairperson and vice chairperson who shall serve until successor committee appointments are made or until the committee is discontinued. Or an alternative phrase would be, or through April 1st of the following year. This gets back to what happens on April 1st to the committees. Are they term limited on April 1st, or do the committees continue until action is taken to appoint new members? Because it's possible if we go with our first meeting on April 24th, what do we do for the Finance Committee on April 15th, or the PQI on April 15th and the Finance Committee on April 20th? Are they still in operation, or do those committees cease to exist on April 1st? We have nothing in our policies right now that define that. And a case in point this year, I neglected to address committee appointments at our April meeting when I was reelected as chair. The committees have continued to function. The chairs of those committees have continued to function. And we're on the agenda later today, we're going to talk about any adjustments to board assignments. I think it's appropriate if there's a change in committee assignments that committee then at their next regular meeting address who they want to have as their chair. So some wording in here to that, or we could simply address that under a policy when we get into policies.
Anybody have thoughts on that? I mean, to me, I would address it in the policy, but.
I heard, maybe I misheard. I thought you said Article 9, but then on page 5, could
Oh,
you?
14, I'm sorry.
Okay, so 14, just making sure. And then
Yeah.
could you just repeat the language you were saying just so that I can?
There are two suggestions. Committees of the board shall elect a chairperson and vice chairperson who shall serve until successor committee appointments are made or until the committee is discontinued. Another alternative was who shall serve through April 1st of the following year, but then that leaves us with a dead zone if we don't have an organizational meeting.
Excuse me, I have a question. Do you want, and this is more kind of philosophical, I don't have a position on it. It's, do you want the committee selecting its chairperson, or do you want the board selecting the chair of the committee?
Our policy, as we established the committees, the board chair was empowered to appoint members to the committee, and the committee would then select a chair and vice chair.
I understand. I'm just asking, this is an opportunity, you know, that works well, great. If you think there's problems with it, then this is the time. But I do agree that all of that can be done by policy, because it's the chair appoints the committees with the approval of the board.
I think, I'm glad you brought that up because I do think it can be good for the board chair to select who he wants to chair or he or she wants to chair those subcommittees. Because I think it can be good to establish leadership of those subcommittees. And then you allow the subcommittees to pick the vice chair. This is what we do with the Board of Commissioners. So then you allow the subcommittee to choose the vice chair. But this board chair, selects the leadership of subcommittees. So it kind of at least establishes a direction, and then the board can, or the committee then can choose the vice chair. So.
Well, now, assuming we did adopt that under policies, it still leaves the question. We meet on April 24th for our regularly scheduled meeting when we elect officers. What happens to the committees that are serving on March 31st when the PQI committee meets and the finance committee meets prior to the next full board meeting? It's possible that Bob is the chair of PQI, and maybe your term of appointment expires on March 31st and you're no longer serving on the board. At that point, the committee could meet and the vice chair could take over the meeting.
Is it the same solution of calling a special meeting?
Yeah.
Yes, or another thing you could do is you could have that turnover date be May 1st. And if somebody's term expired, then it expired and the committee just does what it needs to do. But if you set it May 1st, it actually makes sense because it gives your board chair, first of all, time to be installed, but then time to appoint who they're gonna, if we did follow that model, time to appoint those subcommittee chairs for the following year. And so that it just plays out time-wise better.
Okay, well, we will address that in our upcoming policy work session.
I wrote that down.
Okay, and that was the extent of proposed changes. The other question that came up was chair vacancies and the vice chair. Does the vice chair ascend to the position of chair? Let's say I'm abducted by an alien. Does the vice chair now take over as chair as an official responsibility, or do they temporarily assume those responsibilities until the board meets to vote? And that's not clearly stated. I think in reading through, though, the context of the bylaws, the vice chair assumes the responsibilities of the duties, but not necessarily the title of chair. So that means the vice chair does not ascend to the position. They only act in that position until the next board meeting when a new chair, it could be the vice chair appointed as chair, or it could be somebody totally different. So unless somebody has any further questions, I think that's answered in the bylaws here.
Yep.
And
Do-
that was it.
What was the?
Chair Bird,
Yes.
I just question if there's a conflict in Article 11 where it refers to any officer vacancy. that the board shall elect the successor. And then maybe what you said about acting, assuming responsibilities and duties of chair, does that mean the vacancy, it would just be for one meeting, or in Article 7
Yeah.
reference versus Article 11?
I view absence as different from vacancy.
Okay,
So Article 7 is the chairperson's absence or vacancy. I think absence is they missed a meeting or they weren't able to attend a meeting. Vacancy is they're no longer able to serve in that role.
And a case in point would be, my term as an appointee to this board expires on March 31st. I'm serving as the chair. On April 1st, I can no longer perform those duties because I'm no longer on the board. The vice chair can pick up those duties until the regular board meeting when a new chair is voted in.
I think that's not a great example because that's the end of a term. I think it would be more, a vacancy is if somebody resigns, and there's an opening on the board, and if the chair were to resign, then the vice chair would serve as the chair temporarily. But to fill the vacancy, that would be the vote of the board. Correct? I'm assuming I'm interpreting that.
And we did have that case where one of the county commissioners who was serving as chair resigned or was not reelected. So as of January 1st, they were no longer in a position to serve as chair. The vice chair took over until the board voted a new chair. Mhm. Does that answer your question, Bonnie?
Neil, does that sound correct?
Yes, like I don't. Yes.
It's correct, except that I think it's just important to clarify that that county commissioner's term actually did go through April, and it was a misunderstanding of how our terms work under CMH. So anyways, I think that's important to state.
Okay, and then I guess while we're talking what ifs, I'm the chair for whatever the reason. I can no longer or will no longer serve as chair. The vice chair steps in on an interim basis, carries forward the duties. The board meets, elects a new chair. If they make the vice chair the chair, then they would vote a new vice chair. So that would be a vacancy that occurred through upgrade.
Right.
Good.
Upgrade, yeah. Depends.
Okay, any further questions on the proposed bylaws? If not, I think we have the comments to include in the final draft for board approval. And the other part, policy, as Michael suggested, we'll schedule a workshop because,
session.
and for that, you all have your board policy manual. And I'll refer you to section 11, which deals with the policies related to the executive director's responsibilities and what he or she is authorized to do. And then we also have a couple of pages past that, the code of conduct, which we had some prior discussion on, and some questions were raised about how applicable that is, and if it might suppress First Amendment rights for freedom of speech or thought. So review those as well prior to a workshop so that you're familiar with what our existing policies are, so that we can consider any
And
changes.
we will resend an electronic version of all the policies to everybody.
Great.
That way you have them electronically too. But yeah, I mean, we'll try to get that scheduled, obviously, based on, it's summertime, but what we can do. And obviously we'll follow all rules and stuff related to the Opens Meetings Act and all that stuff on work sessions. So we're going to investigate that also and how we do it and conduct it. We can go to a work session that is not necessarily open to the public. You can do those. But I'll present that to you, Tom, and how we want to handle
Great.
that aspect of it.
Any other questions or comments on bylaws or policies? And the next item is the CEO's performance evaluation.
So just before you move to that, if you don't mind, Chairman Board, while we have Neil on the phone,
Mhm.
just real quick before he can get off, because as he says, the meter's running, right? Neil, do you have any update on the PHP contracts being signed that, remember, there were certain PHPs that didn't sign a contract with the state in prior year? That was one of the reasons why the state wanted to contract out the whole system. I think Neil told me some stuff today that I thought he could pass on, and then I could talk about the impact to us. Go ahead,
Right,
Neil.
and so I would amend that slightly in that there were a number of PIHPs that signed a contract with
Oh,
some
yeah.
red lines, and the state refused to countersign
Okay.
that version. So just to clarify that, their position is that it impacted ISF and some other provisions, and they were addressing that. But for PIHPs, all of whom are regional entities as well, signed and submitted the FY26 contract to the department, I believe sometime in June, maybe mid-June. And earlier this week, the department countersigned the FY26 contract.
The year we're in, yeah.
And so my hope is that this is an indication that things are, that we're not going to go through another privatization effort like we did last fall.
So I think it's a big, now, of course, our current region has a signed contract with the state. We weren't one of the 4 for this year that were part of that, our LRE, but I think it's a good movement in the right direction
Mhm.
for the state saying, all right, there may be reform, but we might be able to do it within the current structure or not. Right? But I thought that was,
Right, because candidly, this happened, but on the notice of forthcoming solicitations, the state posted that there is a PIHP solicitation that they're anticipating to announce in August, but it could come a month earlier or a month later. So
Sure.
it's unclear whether the state is, whether we're signing up for round 2 or we're moving more in the direction of cooperation as we reform.
sure. And I've been on the record many times saying the current system definitely needs reformed. We can do it within the current framework we have with a lot more oversight and leadership. But I think this was still good news to hear that, okay, at
I
least,
agree.
you know, we got contracts in place for all the PHPs that have both signatures on them, which sounds ludicrous that you won't, but we finally do. So I wanted, you had told me that, I thought you could give an update on that.
Mike, can I ask?
Yeah.
So Neil, is it the red line version that was signed or is it the state's version?
I haven't seen all 4, so I don't want to give you bad information. I did not see, in the version I saw, I did not see any crossing out, but I also don't know whether the language to which they were objecting was changed in some way in the FY26, because they were challenging FY24, FY25. I don't know if FY26 had a change in certain provisions such that they were fine with it as presented, or if there was a different part. So the short answer is I didn't see the red line when I was doing a quick scroll in the copy I have. And I didn't run a comparison to FY25, FY24 that are the subject of their litigation to see if there's a material difference.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Neil or Michael? Thank you, Neil, for your counsel.
Thanks,
My
Neil.
pleasure. Thank you all. Hope you have a great
Thank
weekend.
you.
Okay, back to the CEO performance evaluation. You all have received a survey for that, which you can submit anonymously to Amanda, who will blindfold herself and have the computer correlate all the data. We have requested, we originally, I think we were talking August 15th, but that's over a weekend. So the new date is August 14th, which would be the Friday. Mhm. And if you have not conducted that survey, please try to do so in the next 2 weeks so that we can compile that information. The executive committee will review the results of that aggregate data without any way to track who submitted which comments or which ratings. And we'll meet with Michael to review that and then report back to the board. Next item is, I guess, any questions about the review or the survey questions? If you don't feel comfortable answering a particular category, you can put not applicable or just skip it. Then Michael, your summary of the compliance report?
Yeah, so let me tell you why this is here. One of the functions as the executive director CEO is that I have to have direct access to the compliance officer, kind of like the same thing with rights, right? But the compliance officer, who's also managed by the COO. So I have like a dotted line. And one of the things I'm going to start to do, especially in our PQI committee, is to start reporting. We do tons of quarterly compliance monitoring. We have tons of audits we do from a compliance standpoint. And I want to make sure that that committee and then the full board's aware of those results. And then in the future, results where it's appropriate to have out for public view, people can see them. To me, compliance is the floor of quality, not the ceiling. So to be compliant with something means that you're following a regulation, you're doing things as you're supposed to do per contract language or federal regulation of those things, right? And so obviously, if there are items that were out of compliance, the board needs to be educated on a continuous basis. And also to celebrate when we're exceeding or in full compliance. But I do have the worldview that to be compliant in something doesn't mean you're excellent. It just means you're following the minimum. Now, we have so many minimums that it's overwhelming. We have over 1,000 items of compliance data points that we have to touch upon in a given year through the various requirements. So what I submitted in your report was just kind of like last quarter we had all the data, summary of some of those items. But to bring it up today was more to say that in a more formal way, I'm going to have the tremendous amount of compliance activity summarized and reported to a subcommittee and then to the board at least quarterly so that you see that. Because I think the public and you will get an appreciation of how often we're asked to look at how we do things and in what manner and how stringent they can be. So when you look at some of these things, there's like clinical document reviews and, you want to be, in the A range, over 90% when you do those. There are standards related to that. There are also what's called Medicaid verification audits that occur, which means that we have to audit with the regional entity and others, all of our Medicaid claims to the degree that the documentation and those align, which is one of the biggest barriers to mitigating, one of the biggest ways of mitigating waste, fraud, and abuse. So I submitted this to give you a sense of some of the items, but it's more of a formal announcement that I'll be integrating our compliance activity in our various board subcommittees and to the full board, and then have a place where the public and the board at any time could see certain measures of compliance and how we're doing on them. Hence why I put it on the agenda with a sampling. We had, our compliance officer has retired, and so we're looking for a new one. And gee, it's a difficult job to fill, because when people look at what you have to do, they go, this is for the birds, right? And it's almost like you have to do all of the internal affairs stuff too. I'm looking at Paul because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. He's done a similar role many times. But I want to make sure the board understands I'm going to be looking at this and finding ways to really communicate how much compliance reporting we have, what the results are, and what are the key areas that need improvement as part of our performance and quality improvement subcommittee at the board. And you can see, if you're on that committee, I'm slowly but surely adding so many things to that committee. It may have to go monthly. Right now, it's every other month, but I find other things that I think are good to use in that. So this was just to show you kind of some initial results of some of the items, but there are many domains in compliance that I don't think we've educated the board or the community that we look at. That's why it's here. So if that's okay, I'm going to move in that direction of that, because especially we should have always had the focus on mitigating waste, fraud, and abuse. But especially now, we should definitely be doubling down on ensuring that we are following all subsequent regulations, especially when it comes to services delivered, payment of those services. You know, we have measures that look at how many times we seek a give back from somebody where we find that they didn't follow the actual rules of billing or compliance, and we're asking for money back. It's a very small percentage, but we have to look at all of the claims in terms of givebacks, but making sure the board's aware of all that. Because I get questions now of, how do you know your providers or you're doing it right, that we're spending the money correctly? Compliance is one of the big things. And of course, the 6 million other audits that finance has to do. But I'm going to create more of a robust reporting of that. And it's to continue our increase in sharing the various functions of what we do to the board. So I'll take feedback on that, but that's what my strategy is. And I just wanted to give you an example of what some of these things look like.
I think another level is really important, particularly now.
And it's also a chance to celebrate how well we actually do with administrative staff that I think is significantly underrepresented in terms of what we need to do it. I think most organizations would be shocked with the level of bureaucracy in terms of compliance that we actually have to deal with. I'm quite impressed with how well we do in certain areas and areas that we need to strengthen to ensure that we're clear on what's happening out there, because we are the stewards of the public funds. And so I take that extremely seriously, as do the staff. And we're going to start demonstrating that level of diligence to the public and the board, because it's often heralded and ignored. So not anymore.
Michael, I have a question. On the back of that paper, you completed a corrective action plan for a FOIA-related PHI breach.
Yes.
Is that an unusual circumstance, or it doesn't?
No, you can, there are 7,000 ways you can make a mistake in responding to a FOIA. It could be as simple as you needed to delete a certain protective healthcare information and you missed one. And so you have to then report that. as a breach, or we sent information we shouldn't have because we were confused or it wasn't clear and we got an opinion to send it, and after fact, it's like, we shouldn't have sent you this much detail. And so we've had to deal with internal plans of correction to ensure that we don't breach protected healthcare information. You might get a request of like, send me the contract for this provider, and buried in it, you might have some information of who it served. Right? And so unless you go back and pull that out, you're in breach.
Now, if that event were to happen, would you report that to the ORR? And they would investigate?
yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Yep. Especially if it's related to a rights protection right of a client, yeah.
Mhm.
Are there different levels of, so like, if you had a breach, like the severity of the breach?
Yes. There are different levels and different reporting requirements based on the type of breach. With PHI, especially under HIPAA. There are things not related to FOIA we deal with all the time, of things like you leave your office and you left your computer monitor on. And on your computer screen, it has somebody's name that the person that was able to see it didn't have a right to know, right? It's from that all the way to other types of breaches, like you sent out information to someone you shouldn't have. And so it's quite an elaborate labyrinth of do's and don'ts. Like I have to always remember to press, they taught me this Windows L, and it makes all my screens go blank when I leave, because even if you have a timer on it. So there's a difference on the type of breaches and your reporting requirements and how you address it. But you can have breaches that lead to fines
And
Which-
lawsuits.
and lawsuits, which we're not engaged in any of those, but that's the level of this. But being able to see all that and track it as a board member, you'd have a lot more confidence of people coming up to you and say, so how do you monitor that? You're like, yeah, we have a dashboard we look at that reports this stuff. And by the way, you can also look for certain items and see how we did. Because I'm aware that you all get questions all of the time. Oh, you're on the CMH board? Oh, they almost have like a list pre-made. Do you serve anybody? Can anybody get in? How's the compliance? So finding ways for you to be able to answer that with confidence, and then having public facing of items to do the same thing is going to be helpful. Because if without information, you're forced to fill in the blanks with other information. I'd rather have you have the accurate information and the public. So, yeah. That's more of an announcement of what is yet to come under new business. And so you can start seeing that develop over time.
Okay, we're ready to move on to committee reports. The first report is from the PQI committee.
Yeah, we met on July 13th, and we had a really good meeting. We met the IBH analytics team. Michael will talk more about that partnership going forward in his report. But we did meet the whole team in regards to their, Dr. Lubbers and the other members of the team in terms of their backgrounds and what interest areas they have and some of the programs, some of the research that they can do for us to do better data analytics, I think, and give us another level of oversight into what we have going on. But Michael will talk more about that. We had a great presentation by the Assertive Community Treatment Program. And just to echo what Donna talked about, I really want to highlight the fact that every time I get one of these presentations, I am so impressed with the level of professionalism that the staff has. This is not an easy population to work with. And I know because I worked on an ACT team years ago. And the level of commitment and dedication that these folks have is absolutely amazing. So kudos to them. It's a really, really good program, and it seems like the people that are running it are really doing a great job. Our standing updates, Olivia talked about our access and crisis utilization report. Highlight of that is from May to June, 96% of all those who reach the final phase of the screening process actually enter services. She also talked about crisis contacts, hospitalization rates in areas. And I think eventually we'll all be able to see this in a dashboard So we're moving gradually toward having the whole board being able to see the dashboards and stuff like that. As well, we did a discharge, the summary dashboard. And as Michael will talk again, the authority transition update. I think you sent something out yesterday that more clarifies that process going forward. And then, looks like everything else that we had talked about, I think you'll talk about in your report, Michael.
Will.
The aligning of CMH funding with consumer needs and emergency intervention obligations memo. So at any rate, that, if anyone has any questions or anyone else on the committee wants to, add to that,
I do have a comment. During the course of our meeting, we had discussions about recovery. And I have to admit that I had an inaccurate understanding of what recovery means on the MI side. We've talked historically about the two different communities that we serve and the difference between habilitative supports and rehabilitative supports. And the concept has always been, well, there's hope of recovery and expectation of recovery on the MI side that does not apply to the IDD population, where we're talking lifelong supports. Well, the reality is, on the MI side, recovery is not assured. And as I've gotten to know some folks who are dealing with opioid with substance abuse or alcohol substance abuse, recovery is a process. It's not a milestone you achieve and then put behind you necessarily. And I thought it might be helpful, Michael, for the full board at some point to have a presentation by you on the dynamics of what we're, even the mild to moderate population may not achieve recovery, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be happy to put that together. You know, you think of severe and persistent mental illness like any other illness. You may be in remission, right? But it could always come back up, just like cancer or leukemia. So the dynamics of defining recovery, what that means, and for our population, they could have many interactions with community mental health on their journey, on their trajectory, versus people that think, and this is just a prelude of what the presentation would include with others being part of it, of, oh, you go to 10 sessions, you learn 3 coping skills for anxiety and you're fine. That's a very simplistic version, but the managed care model, if you understand it, suggests that that is possible. Things like rapid stabilization models or 10 sessions and you learn the skills. Well, if you actually have mental illness, it's a lifelong condition that goes into remission. And the same thing with our developmentally disabled individuals. They have lifelong conditions that there can be periods where certain symptoms or things they deal with are in remission, but they can always come back. And it's a philosophical shift that we have to keep educating, because when you compare us to the private sector, for folks that might have different types of conditions, there's a thing like, well, all they need is to do is see a psychiatrist in about 10 sessions. I wish that was the case. So defining recovery, I have this thing that sometimes is controversial. Therapy doesn't equal cure. It's a part of the process to get to remission. Your life and your life improving is the goal. Quality of life, your ability to interact in the life in the way that you would choose and others would help with. And it's the same on both sides. So I appreciated the discussion that we had at PQI, and ACT represents this. You may not need the team as much, but doesn't mean you kick them off the team if they start seeing you less. Because it's a journey and a relationship, and it's fundamentally different view of behavioral health that we have to deal with versus other conditions that might be more moderate or mild, if there's really such a thing.
yeah, I think the prevalent view is that that everything is curable. And that's promoted in the private sector, and I promoted that as a clinician. But I worked with a lot of the worried well.
Right.
Like an anxiety episode or
Right.
a brief depressive episode or something like that. CMHs have always dealt with those those moderate to severe programs that the private sector, at least at this point, is not really able to handle. um, under the current structure of
Sure.
managed care.
But we'd be happy to put something together and have staff join us that, because it's a philosophical approach to care. And now there are in the private sector levels of care that deal with this, inpatient, residential. When I'm talking about traditional outpatient care,
Right.
seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist, and seeing somebody once a month, is not really gonna. So I think it was helpful for us to kind of go through that with ACT, and I very much appreciated, Tom, your dialogue on that, and be happy to put that together because CMH is a distinct tradition of care focused on a distinct population. That can be replicated if CMH doesn't do it, but you have to keep all of those principles the same. So if I were to privatize the system, if we were forced to, then we'd have to move all those philosophical approaches there
Mhm.
to accomplish it.
And that's our fear of,
Yeah.
private medical providers are just not equipped to
Yeah.
handle that.
I mean, it can be done if you move all of the assumptions of care there too, and make sure whoever's managing it or whatever is funded appropriately and views it that way. But that's why, Donna's mentioned it, the sheer volume of what we do and the reach and how we do it is very comprehensive.
Now, Amanda, how quickly do we post the videos of the committee meetings? Is that usually within a few days? And that's on our website. So those board members who have not had an opportunity to view the last PQI meeting would be a valuable meeting for you to stream. Okay, if nothing else for PQI, we'll have a Finance Committee report.
Thank you. We met on Monday, the 20th, and we didn't have a presentation. So today I'll just go over the things that our standing committee and also some new business that we covered. Under our standing committee, looking at the CCBHC oversight, we always have been talking about really closely looking at the financial and as well as how that's balancing with meeting the needs, and was happy to hear we're working with developing a dashboard for that. And next month, we will view the dashboard for CCBHC. We'll look more closely at that. Then we talked about the millage information, of course, moving forward with helping strengthen the public understanding of what it is we're asking. And also glad to hear that IBH is developing a dashboard to look at millage outcomes. So that will be moving forward. That will really be helpful pieces of information for us. And then the third thing, standing committee is looking at the budget deficit reduction. We talk about that each month. At our meeting on Monday, we moved that into new business. And when I get to that, you'll understand why we moved it there. Looking at contracts, the ones that you approved today, there were 5 amended and renewed, and there was 1 new contract that we reviewed. Also, the financial statement, we had some discussion around the term approve versus received. And where we landed on that was amending the wording, and you probably saw that today in your agenda, amending the wording to say that we received it, to bring it forward here. Not necessarily approved. We felt that was beyond the authority that we are given to approve. So then we received that financial statement, and then the next item that we discussed was the one that moved from standing updates, budget deficit reduction. And a lot of that centered around where we are with the LRE. Encouraging report from Dr. Brashears was that, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm believing it was 100% support of moving more in the direction of fee-for-service, looking at the needs-based versus looking at per member or, the individual support. And that hybrid approach was supported throughout, with all the CEOs
Yeah.
of the CMHs who are part of our LRE. So having said that, also the feeling is that there was a need for a backup plan in the event that the LRE does not continue to move forward with looking at how those funds are distributed. And so, and Dr. Brashears, please
Sure, yeah.
jump in and clarify, but just talking about what that would mean in terms of signing the contract with the LRE, if we are comfortable signing that as is, or if we feel that we really need to, as we move toward authority status, do we really need to look at signing a contract that we might be not in total agreement about as it relates to
Yeah, and so
funding is distributed?
what I was suggesting is I'm going to look into the consequences of not signing it. Since the finance committee, I looked into the consequences of not signing it, and they're pretty dire. Such things like, fine, they could say you no longer manage any of the Medicaid services. We'll have somebody else do it, right? But I was able to take that feedback, and basically what I was saying to the finance committee is, look, if we believe that the funding to the region and to us is not adequate to cover the need, and if we believe that there's a portion of the deficit that cannot be stabilized without more revenue, then why would we sign a contract that says stay within the current model, even though you know you can't do it? So I looked into the initial consequences of not signing the contract, and I probably won't recommend that we play chicken with the region on that, that we continue our pressure with the region to use the region as a resource to figure out the funding strategy. And in my report, you'll hear more about that, and work with them. And then the contingency plan is if the region isn't able to address this issue, then I feel I have the ability to go directly to the state with some of these concerns. My strategy has been to go to the state with some of these concerns, and they politely reminded me I don't have a Medicaid contract with them. I have it with the region. So they're saying, good study, good analysis, good points, talk to the region. So that's what we've been doing. But I will be developing a contingency plan, which I've already started to do, if the region's not able to address this. Because it's my belief, and I told this to the Finance Committee, that there's a portion of our deficits that's structural, that has nothing to do with how we authorize or manage or the amount of overhead we have. It's a structural deficit. And I believe that us and Network 180, to a large degree, most of our deficit are things that we cannot control, that require strict utilization management guidelines from the region to help with that, or more funding and or both. So that was the nuance we were talking about with the contract. But since the Finance Committee, I've determined probably not a good strategy not to sign the thing. And I don't have to get Neil Marchant on the clock again to answer that. I've looked at the consequences, and they could be dire. Like they could immediately just I don't think they'd do any of this, but I don't think I'd want to put us in the position for even the option that somebody else would manage our Medicaid benefit in Ottawa County besides us. But I still have to address the issue. So more since we talked, but I spent the week, and I think I was telling Anna, the COO, yeah, I can't recommend we not sign it at this point. Kind of like what the regions just did with the state, like sign it, work your issues within a contractual relationship so that our citizens don't lose us providing services as a nuclear option, which the region could do. They could say, well, all right, we'll have Network 180 do it then, or somebody else.
But you've been encouraged by the agreement of all of the
Yes.
CEOs.
The CEOs all agreed for the region to study, to conduct the study, and it was brought to the LRE board that they want to allocate funds to do that, and that's where we're at with that. This was good because the CEOs at one point, we all didn't agree on the need for the study. In fact, we did, I'm stealing kind of Bob's update in the LRA, but we did have one member of Allegan County say, why are we going to spend money to just redistribute money that we don't have in the region? And my answer to that person was very clear. I got to see her yesterday outside the meeting, and what I've been saying all along, we need the data so for the whole region, what the needs are and what they cost, so we could advocate to the state to deal with this. I'm not naive. It's not like the region can print more money. So just changing how we distribute it in the region is not going to solve the whole problem. It's the very notion of how much we get and what's that based on. That's the beauty of getting this study done, is that we have data to say this is, and then tell us we're wrong. If we are wrong, then tell us how we're supposed to limit a benefit that you say we can't limit. That's the goal. And I've been at it for 17 straight months. But I'm glad that we're at this particular junction where we're all in agreement. Yeah, we have to get the information. We got to do this. We got to get it. Which I think is a major positive development within the region.
And that's the conclusion of the report, unless anyone else has anything to add.
Michael, I have a question for you. The previous discussion with Neil about the PIHPs that refused to sign the DHS's contract unless their changes were accepted was a bit of a nuclear option on their part. And it's not unlike international negotiations. You know, the art of the deal isn't necessarily a peaceful or
Right.
a quiet process, as we've seen. Do we have any options? We've talked in the past about, well, maybe Network 180 in Ottawa join forces and form our own PIHP, or
Sure.
we go with another PIHP and leave the LRE if that's what it takes
Yeah.
to get more money.
There are options. There are options in the bylaws of the LRE. None of them are good. So the question is this an issue within our regional LRE's philosophy? Or truly is Bashir's, Bill Ward, and others correct that we just don't get enough revenue and you still have to manage better, right? Like that's the approach. Right now, there's no value with me in looking into it, seeking to leave the current LRE or join another region. It's doubtful that others would accept us if you have a deficit, right? Don't tip. In fact, as you're all aware, I sent a communication to all CMH executive directors in the state asking a question, who's in a Medicaid deficit? Just out of curiosity, there's 46 of us, who's in, right? Now, the responses are still coming in, but what I have a lot happening in my response is the people that don't have a deficit say, well, we have a surplus. And I keep writing, that's awesome. I'm interested if anybody is actually in our position. And I heard from certain CEOs that are, I'm collecting that data because if you're a legislator, you hear that the system is underfunded, okay? All right, so who's in a deficit or not? Who isn't? Why are that? What are the common features? So Tom, right now, there really are not other remedies that I looked into it that would allow us to just pack up and move, because guess what? All of the CMHs in the region form that regional entity. So it'd mean another region to take us, they'd have to reform their bylaws. There'd have to be a unanimous vote to accept us. The state would have to approve. It would mean the dissolving of the Lakeshore Regional Entity unless it's allowed to be reformed. It's just not a viable option at this point. And so the best option is to work with our region to get the information we need. And I will be diligent to ensure that continues to advocate for what we need. All other remedies that I can think of put our ability to continue to provide services in Ottawa in jeopardy, and I won't do that to our consumers. But sooner or later, there's got to be a change in the funding model or clarity on what is allowable in terms of what you approve. That's why I've called for uniform regional utilization management guidelines, like other regions have, not all, that tell all the CMH partners in a consistent way, imagine this, Beth, in a consistent way of saying how you determine how much of something somebody should be. It shouldn't matter where you live. You should be able to move anywhere in this state, go to any particular CMH, and relatively get the same package of services for someone with relatively the same constellation of needs. That is not the case. So unless we're willing to deal with that, it's tough to say, does Lakeshore Regional Entity need more money? Right? Well, other regions are doing okay or not doing okay because our definition of need is completely different, especially on the IDD side. That's the long-term goal. I'm already into my report, just so you know, because that's like some of the bulk of it. That's the crux of the argument. Either dear state of Michigan and region, you either get really clear that we're over authorizing and show us how in Ottawa, thus we should be reducing authorizations, which I have not been able to determine that would be a reasonable course of action, right? Or you agree that our revenue does not meet the need and pay us based on an agreed upon model of need. And that's in this director's report under the level of care that we have defined as enhanced health and safety. And it could include folks that are MI and IDD, and it can include kids in it, but primarily it's sitting in our IDD adult population where folks have needs that are legitimate, medically necessary needs for health and safety that requires a large amount of observational report and staffing that can go over $500 a day, all the way up to $2,000 a day. Network 180 has somebody that costs $2,500 a day. Because the amount of people in the setting they're in is so restrictive, it's extremely expensive. That is not in the rates that we get paid to the region. We have led the way in this county of identifying this population through IBH and our staff doing a comprehensive university level analysis proving that this group isn't an outlier. They're a distinct population of people. They're not an outlier of people, our folks that need that we're just spending too much on because we don't have good utilization management standards and we're just willy-nilly giving them stuff. You can tell I get agitated because that's what we're accused of. I remember telling a family member, I remember it was in this board, I used the word outlier, and we had somebody come up to public comment, said, my child is not an outlier. They're a distinct person with distinct needs that you've proven they need, and by the way, authorized through the person-centered planning process. So that is the agenda to legitimize this need, because if we're told you're not going to get more revenue, stay within your current budget, even with those needs, then we have to say, how do you prioritize the entire system with limited money? How do you do that? And you need tighter standards that the region agrees to, because guess what? If we change the way dramatically how we authorize how much somebody gets, they all have appeal rights. And so guess who hears the appeals after us, the region? So if they're not on board with utilization standards that say, here's how you limit what you authorize, and the appeal goes to them, and they just simply go, yeah, okay, we'll just let it go by, then guess what? We haven't solved the problem. So that's the strategy I'm using. In addition to, are we managing correctly? Can we cut down the things that we control? We have $1.6 million in staffing savings in positions we have not filled as a way to deal with this deficit. Positions that we need, that we have not filled. That's something in our control. Ensuring clients get the right amount of service is in our control. So just educating, the overall approach is, yes, manage better. Yes, look for efficiencies. Yes, look for cost savings. But fight this battle of let's get clear on what we're supposed to do to ensure that the needs of our folks are met and we're funded for it. I'm passionate about it because it takes a lot of energy to get people to understand that. For the longest time, the best standard that you have for a CEO, for a CMH director is quite simple. Are you staying within your budget? You know what? I'll be honest with this board. If I was staying within my budget, no one would care how I'm doing it. Not you, you would. People go, wow, then Dr. Bashir's great. They're doing it. You're staying within your budget. You must be doing it. A lot of times, it's luck alone. You're 1% off, you're 5% off, you're millions of dollars off in our budget. You're 7% off, you're millions of dollars off in our budget. So you could budget 95% correctly and have a dramatic increase in utilization. And if you don't somehow, without revenue, figure out who to cut, which you're not allowed to, that means you're not successful. I take all the challenges seriously, but when you look at all of the stuff in my report, it leads to similar stuff that I'm saying now. So why did we have IBH continue? Remember, IBH was an existing contracts for analytics that you approved. One of the things I didn't do when I rolled this out was to remind my staff, so if you're listening, staff, that IBH isn't replacing anybody at CMH. I'm not bringing in IBH analytics as a way to say, I no longer need my staff to stop doing something, right? I'm expanding their role with the existing contract, by the way. I didn't ask for an increase in their contract that they currently have, to have a third-party valid verification of the results and the studies that we are doing, and to have dashboard development so the public knows there's a third party helping it with this. It isn't what Dr. Bashir just thinks you should see, and I'm doing it. That's one of the major rationales of bringing an IBH, which is on my update. And if you haven't watched the PQI video, watch it. You'll know that they are a nationwide organization that works with SAMHSA and a lot of groups. This isn't just Dr. Bashir's friends. Okay, this is a very, and it's only, and I bring that up because they have been friends of ours. In fact, their company started at our CMH as interns many, many years ago. So that is one of the reasons why IBH is asked to augment and strengthen what we do, not to replace the staff that I have looking at analytics. Because I didn't make that clear, and they're like, what does this mean? So if I was looking at this, am I no longer, no, we're adding firepower to what you're doing. We're gonna have to lead the way and demonstrating these premises that I have related to needs-based with evaluation and research that's at the university level. Some way to prove the point. Other than that, when I'm talking to the other CEOs, I will tell you, that's just Bashir's again going, right? And I can write. I write all the time. I know, because you see, I send you stuff all the time. So it's validating, because if we're wrong, we need to know that. We need to like, no, this isn't playing out. What you're suggesting is the cause. We need to move in a different direction. And so that was one of, and I put that in my report, some of that in there. And they will be helping us with that. And so I encourage you to watch, because you get a little history lesson on there. And I told them not to be modest, because Dr. Darren Lubas that runs that, he's a very modest person. He won't tell you to the extent of what they've done as an organization. And by the way, they at one point developed for the region, are you ready? Paul was there, a comprehensive way to determine need through the regional entity and a methodology to do it. And it just wasn't utilized. So they already have done the work. Ellery had it. Beacon came in, it's a change in philosophy. Dr. Lubers was left with hat in hand when they worked comprehensively with this region already to develop the very thing I'm talking about. So they can help us. You were there, you remember, there were a lot more variables, but that's what happened. Lynn Doyle led that effort with us and got that done. And just wasn't utilized. It was a change in philosophy, a change of how the region was going to manage. There was an absolute system based on what we're talking about. So we're not having to recreate the wheel. It's getting back to the future, so to speak.
We actually presented that to the state and it was supported by the state.
Right. So in my report, I talk about the alignment. What I was doing there, and the finance committee and the board knows this, what I proposed, and I only needed them to say, we'll do the evaluation. I was suggesting, and I still believe I'm right, that the PEPM model of distributing funds just by Medicaid lives alone violates all of the principles of person-centered planning, home and community-based standards, and federal regulations that say you must distribute funds in a needs-based model or a hybrid of PEM eligibles and the needs base. I wrote that 10-page work. I sent you a summary of that. That led the discussion to take seriously the request that Bob Davis said, hey, months ago in the LRE, let's study it. Between those two variables was enough to people say, all right, we'll look at it. And so I firmly believe, passionately, that a methodology that only uses Medicaid lives to fund CMHs ignores the non-Medicaid population that we are also asked to serve, and suggests that all needs are equally the same, and I have the ability to say, Beth costs $5,000 a month to serve, so Donna, you only get, I better hope that Donna only costs $500 to serve a month. And you have enough of those where you should be able to work it out the end. You have some high need people that you pay for and some low need people you pay for. Well, Chairman Board, if you believe the logic that I've been saying that mental health is a lifelong condition, levels of care are real, but the amount of money you save from stepping down doesn't even come close to what you need to manage the need overall. PEPM models alone underfund the most needy and suggest that the people that don't need as much will never need any more. Not to mention, you can't get any new people that come in. That's why I'm attacking it. So that's what that's about, and we're moving in that direction. I want to make sure if residents are understanding this, your needs, you're not an outlier. If you have documented needs that are medically necessary that we have approved, we have said you need such service at that level. We don't have families coming in and dictating everything, you know, give us the moon. They may say that and we say, well, how about Saturn versus 6 moons, right? But these are real needs and they're legitimate. Are we going to strengthen our processes? Sure. But I don't want to pit groups of people against each other in Ottawa County. You just spend all the money in residential care. Okay, that's not true, but yeah, a lot goes there. What about everybody else? Yeah, what about everybody else? Needs-based addresses that. So that's what that is, just reminding that, and the strategy that I'm having to address this, knowing that the answer could be, you're not going to get any more money. Deal with it. Then I go, all right, here are the implications of that. Denying care, wait lists, reducing previous authorizations down. We'd be saying they're no longer medically necessary. We're reducing this, right? Are there some improvements in that area? Sure, we're working them all the time, but that's what the implications are. I could get rid of the entire management team, me, everybody, and it wouldn't even come close to solving deficit, right? So that's that. Millage renewal, I'll tell you, over the past month, we've had a consistent and broad educational presence related to education and millage. I got to tell you, Chelsea and Anna and the customer service staff and all the staff at CMH have been doing an amazing job of getting the word out and educating about the mental health millage. Friends of CMH has been doing a great job as well, but that's a separate group. I provide education to them. They go out and do their things. There are yard signs everywhere. Social media, there's not a day that doesn't go by that there's some type of highlight of a millage program that's there. I think that what I learned during this renewal process was a lack of understanding of the variety and the amount of programs the millage has touched. And so it taught me that you have to keep talking about the different ways millage have been working and not always focusing on one group or another group, because I got feedback like, I didn't even know you use millage as part of the stuff in the jail, or this over here, or prisoner reentry, of all of these areas that we have been doing the state of Michigan's job due to the lack of general fund funding we get with our millage to fill in the gaps of the non-Medicaid population. And so I learned through this renewal process, wow, it's this big with our tentacles in so many things. And if people understood that, showed how we hold people accountable to do that and measure the outcomes, there would have been a lot less questions during the millage education process. So I'm proud to say that I've learned a lot about how we need to talk about, monitor, educate about the millage. And I think that we've been very successful over the last couple of months in getting the word out. We have another millage education meeting coming up on the 30th at CMH at noon as well. We've been on the radio, we've been on TV. We got another newspaper article that's coming up on the Grand Haven paper next week when they go over all the millages. And just that has been a great methodology for us to use. But I did, just so you know, learn a lot about how to talk about it, how to display the outcomes, and how moving forward, one way or another, showing the accountability related to it. And I think as a staff, we've all benefited through the renewal process to gain that. So I just wanted to highlight that. And those of you that have been active by both educating your folks and by promoting one way or another. Of course, I could never say how you should vote, right? But I will, so just people that are leaving it up to the folks to make up their mind and educating, I appreciate that.
I think that the kit that is connected to the website
Yeah.
for CMH Millage, if you just look at those videos that were produced, it just shows the wide range of programming
Huge.
that's out there. And those are the real stories. Those are the real people that are affected. So I think it's really a compelling thing.
Yeah.
It's not hard to sell the millage once you show the data.
Yeah, well, selling it and talking about the impact, right?
Yeah.
And so I've learned like, okay, wow, we can go to, I mean, just the millage website, right? Part of it has been helpful, but there's so much more that we're going to be able to do. And by the way, if it didn't continue, I still would do a comprehensive review of how it went, the programs that are currently funded, what's the future look like thing. So the lessons are learned regardless of the outcome. And I think that's going to be good for Ottawa County on that. So I appreciate everybody's work. We're getting close to find out.
Can I just say one thing on
Yeah.
that too? I thank you for putting out the information on IBH, because one of the big pieces of feedback that I get is the need for accountability with
Mhm.
how we're spending the money and ensuring that it's being used appropriately. And so I think that's a huge concern of the community. Like if we're giving you additional funds, you know, what are you doing to ensure how it's being used? And I feel like some particular uses of the millage are highlighted and in the public eye on a continuous basis.
Yeah.
Whereas others remain fairly invisible.
Correct.
And, you know, and they're valuable. And those are the pieces that I think the public needs to see more of.
Yes.
So thank you for though highlighting the IBH, because I think that's actually really critical for it passing. I think the public really needed to know that we are taking that piece very seriously.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So the next, because, you know, we're only just doing 6 million things. The next update's on the authority status transition. So we're in the dog days of summer. The state of Michigan verbally and in an email, yeah, when we're in receipt of your transition plan, But as Neil Marchand told me this morning, we still haven't got the official letter saying, you're good. We are assuming the following, that we will be able to stand up full swing as an authority on October 1. That's what we're assuming. Our plan, though, is not to move any of the employees to count to authority employees until January 1. The reason for that is to ensure that they don't get two different W-2s in a year, that we have the healthcare benefits transition the way we need them to, based on the calendar of doing all that. And we know that can be done legally. So even though we'll be stood up fully as an authority October 1, all of the staff, except for yours truly, will be moving to be an authority employee on January 1. So we're working out the details of that. We're working out the details and finalizing on our service agreement with the county of which services they're going to continue to provide, which we have to stand up by ourselves. Some of it you can't know until we got official things like our EIN number and word that we're an authority, because you couldn't set up a bank account or you couldn't do these things. So in a lot of items, we wish we would have been further along, but you can't actually do it until you're the thing. So we're building in all of these transition after October 1 things. The employees going to authority status on January 1. We're working on all of the agreements with the county. We're finalizing those of what their services and what we're going to do. My philosophy is keep as much as you can the same for the first year of the authority. After that, you evaluate, do I still need that from county fiscal? Do I still need that from county HR? Because they'll give you a year to figure out what services we want to continue to contract with the county once we have the training wheels off of being an authority for a while. And that's going quite well. We're just getting to the final agreement so that I can show you and we can move forward with that. We have been doing budget projections for 2027 already based on these discussions. So Myra, our CFO, and others have been working with the county of like, how do we set up the budget for next year for you to approve? Well, we have to know exactly how much we're paying for everything still, right? So that's all happening in there. We're anticipating MERS to be transferred over correctly. That's the retirement. We are going to ask for kind of like a final study to know what our liability is. So that will happen before October. Healthcare, we know we can negotiate at the same negotiating pool as the county and get the same exact package if we so choose. And so we're going to work with the county to do that. So our employees don't see a change in that. Now, the county, any single year could change healthcare plans, right? They could make changes. We're going to keep a close eye on that moving forward for at least several years of if they make a change, does it make us to make a corresponding change so that we could have similar benefit packages or identical, or I assume we risk losing a big portion of our directly operated staff. This impact to authority status has the majority of impact is on them. In terms of the board functioning, we're changing the bylaws and stuff. It's a change, but not a drastic change, right? But that's the impact. So we're paying close attention to that. And as we get closer, once we have things finalized, you'll be able to get updates on that, especially when we get to the budget calendar for fiscal year 2027. You'll see how all this comes in. I think we're working well together as a transition team. It's tough in the summer. A lot of people are off. So sometimes like, oh, I wish I could have this meeting and so and so. So we're trying to deal with that in the summertime, there's a lot of vacation time. But we're getting the core decisions we need in the timeline that we need them to get done to move us into the position to transition. So
Mike,
that's what that's saying. Yeah.
How soon do you anticipate starting the labor negotiations then?
Our labor contract ends at December, the end of December, right? And so we'll be an authority when that contract is up for negotiation. And so we have to start opening up negotiations probably right after October, right? Because I'd have to be the chief negotiator with our attorney, right, and our HR representative. It would no longer be the county doing that. So that's the plan for that.
Okay.
The labor's aware of that as well. So that's the authority update, if that makes sense. Let's see. So I did in the last section give you a summary of all of those and how I think it kind of implications for us that you can read. It's just a summary that says, based on all the rest of the stuff, here's how I think that all of this puts us in a strong position for authority transition, addressing the needs-based items, millage renewal, in a summary. So that's what that last section is there, and you can read it. If you have feedback, you can send it to me, but that concludes my report. I'll take any questions. By the way, I'm still growing the beard because we don't have additional funding yet, so I'm going to have to start grooming it. Remember, I'm not going to shave until I get additional funding. So I've been told if it ends up like ZZ Top, that's going to be a problem, but I will be dealing with it. But
Anyone else have any comments or questions on the executive director's report? I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention and show appreciation for the amount of work that Michael has done with the CEOs, the LRE. You know, Dave and I sit on that board, and one of the things that's apparent to me is easily get into fractionalized thinking that, well, my group needs this, or my group needs this, or my group needs this, but it really is a collective dynamic. And for the fact that the CEOs actually came together and agreed that this is worth looking at, I think it's a big step. It's a big step. And we had the full executive committee support of it too, which to me is another step forward. Now, we still have to see whether we can afford the actuarial. But I think that collective dynamic is starting to change a little bit. And so I really do appreciate Michael's work on that. So.
That is a huge shift to get all in agreement, so.
Yep, hence the beard.
Now, Michael, you did not address anything about the House bill that did not get reported out of the Budget Committee. Have you heard any more on that?
It's kind of at a standstill.
Mhm.
So there's no action being taken at the moment. Are you talking about House Bill 6022? Was that the
Yeah.
one I'm talking about? Yeah.
Now,
So-
there was recently an article I saw, Blue Cross Blue Shield announced that it was no longer providing mental health services for limited licensed psychologists or psychiatrists. To me, that is another indication as to why we don't want to privatize mental health services to the medical providers.
Yeah, that's a interesting, there's another thing connected to that. So the state of Michigan is the only state that has a limited licensed master's degree psychologist designation. Everywhere else in the country, you have to be a doctoral level to be called a psychologist. They've done a redetermination of the credentialing to say that they're no longer going to accept a limited licensed master's level psychologist, even though they have other master's level with different licensures accepted. So one could look at it as just a change in credentialing alone, like, hey, with this group. I will tell you, the limited licensed psychologist position has been vital for the public and private system to maintain an adequate network of care at the master's degree level. And it's part of a bigger symptom. So one could look at their decision as, oh, they just eliminated this level of credentialing as being eligible, which will then limit the access significantly for their own members to receive services. There are tons of limited licensed psychologists in the state of Michigan. The greater problem we're having is now the health plans on the Medicaid side. Their own clinicians are saying, because of the new strategy through this mental health framework that's being tried to be pushed through the state, of them having to do the same tools that we use to determine, like on the MI side, it's called the locus or the Michicans, that they no longer want to participate as a provider in the Medicaid health plans that provide all of the Medicaid outpatient counseling to the moderately mentally ill in Michigan. We already have groups like Pine Rest saying that, sending folks over to us saying, we have no more capacity to take more Medicaid folks, even though they have a contract with Priority Health to do that, because our providers are no longer willing to take Medicaid because of the requirements that we've had to do since time immemorial are now applied to them. So the Blue Cross issue is symptomatic of a reduction of the amount of master's level clinicians, both on the credentialing type and who's willing to participate with the state of Michigan on the reimbursement rates for that group. In fact, in talking to Pine Rest, they need about a 40% increase in their Medicaid rates for them to even break even. Right? So Tom, this is going to be emblematic of mental health reform going forward. If you don't pay people the actual cost of care and you start limiting who can provide the care based on no logic alone, besides we had a change in our credentialing policy. It wasn't like they did an analysis and said they shouldn't be doing the service. Master's level psychologists have been doing it for decades, 60 years.
So this would be like eliminating PAs for
Right.
some physicians. Just
But
think
they
more
don't-
nurse practitioners from physicians.
They don't allow them to practice with that limited license under somebody like they
They
do.
just
PA.
They
removed
do
it.
now,
That's what they removed.
but they've just removed that ability.
They're saying, nope,
Because I think
because they've
that's-
always had a supervision requirement with somebody else, right?
Right.
Which to me, I thought was nonsense, by the way. It's just something that was a compromise. Master's level psychologists are fully trained and credentialed to do anything as any other master's level clinician would do. So it's always been asinine that they've had to, and it's just because Michigan created a definition of psychologist that didn't require a doctorate. So that's the difference in our state. You can't go anywhere else in the country and see master's level psychologist. So we had to say they were limited license under the supervision of somebody else, even though I think it's unnecessary, but they've removed that, like can't even use them if you have that, which is more aligned to what you're saying. It decreases the amount of availability for folks to receive care in a state where everybody's saying we have an access of care crisis. Now, there are other reasons that Blue Cross may have made that decision that I'm not privy to, right? But that's the impact to the overall system, is
So
less
is this-
people.
Is this where the other insurers are going to follow suit?
If
Possibly.
they so choose. You know, all I can tell you is Blue Cross has an awesome responsibility and a lot of covered lives. They don't make these decisions lightly, so I'm sure there's variables that I'm not aware of. I'm just telling you the impact, and it can lead to more people coming to us because they have no provider, right? And then we go, well, you know, okay, you know, and it happens. Yeah,
So your waiting lists are going to get longer.
Right.
and
Yeah.
longer.
and
Care.
all I'm saying is on the private side or these other companies that have to deal with the folk, it's not like they're getting reimbursed enough either, right? I don't want to make it seem like, oh, the Medicaid health plans, they're not the devil. They're in the same game we are in. We just, the biggest issue is, are we part of them or not part of, carved in or carved out of a health plan? That's the big difference between our system and other systems in the country. So I don't think them evil. I say them different. You know, and we have to keep that in mind because they are serving millions of people in this state. So this has a ripple effect on accessibility. I'm sure it didn't come lightly to them, but it does have an impact.
Now, do we use limited license psychologists?
sure
for
do.
Providing Medicaid services?
Yes.
Mhm.
Your previous executive director had that. Or, yeah, we have a lot of master's level limited license psychologists that are extremely competent, well-educated and trained.
I think if I remember right, Bonnie, there was one that was at OAC that everybody saw when they wanted guardianship, because
Yes.
you had to have,
That's right.
and to pay for that
Mhm.
in OAC, I think. Doesn't have that anymore, or didn't,
No, I don't think they do,
okay.
right?
Yeah, in my previous life before I took this job again, I was on the front line to try to remove the limited from limited license for master's level psychologists. And, you know, if they change that, it solves the problem. If they take limited away from limited, have a different national exam for them. Because right now, the limited licensed psychologists take the same license exam as a doctoral level, but they don't have to take the full exam. They just take a certain section of it, right? So they're going to pass a certain section of it, and then they get a limited license. If they just create a master's level psychologist national exam, right? Just like licensed professional counselors or social workers have, right? This problem would go away. And don't, believe me, more people than me have said this. I mean, this is like something that's been dealt with, but that would solve the problem permanently.
But Blue Cross could then still decide not to include them as part of.
Well,
the
if they get rid of the limited, then their credentialing would accept them. It's the definition of psychologist is the issue.
Mhm.
That's the core issue. Not to get too in the weeds, but that's really what it is. Their decisions based on, we don't recognize them as a fully licensed psychologist, therefore they can't do certain things. Where if you're a licensed professional counselor, it's a distinctly different thing, separate license, separate scope, right? Licensed clinical social worker, the same thing, right? This is clearly remedied by getting limited out of limited and making a determination. Are we going to allow master's level people to be called a psychologist? That's what this is. And this is the only state in the country that deals with it. Everybody else has said there's no such thing. You're either a licensed professional counselor, licensed social worker, or a doctoral level psychologist. Move along, everybody. So we have a long history that's different in the state of Michigan. We were one of the last states to get full licensure for social workers. So, which you need.
Okay, any other comments or questions on the CEO's report? No presentation?
Correct.
And no old business. Next item is committee appointments. We had said we were going to address the components of our two committees. And I asked if any members on the committees were not interested in continuing to serve, or if there were other board members who were interested in committee assignments. What we came up with is the Finance Committee will stay as is. That's Bob Davis, Sylvia, Donna, Vonnie, and me. PQI, Bob, Peg, Paul, and Vonnie has requested to relinquish her position on that committee, and David has agreed to serve. So I would recommend appointing him. And then the next question is, we've never really set standards for the committee. We talked in terms of having 5 people, including the board chair. One of the possibilities would be appointing an alternate for each of the boards, so that if one of the members of the committee could not make it, an alternate could stand in. And that might help in terms of trying to gain a quorum if we were short on members attending. And the other approach is we have a board member, Paul, who is interested in Finance Committee, but the options are he could monitor it and watch the video of the committee and submit comments live during that, or any board member could attend any of the committee meetings. And the option there is if you had an interest in something that's on the agenda for Finance Committee and you want to attend the Finance Committee, you're welcome as a director to attend the meeting. And my feeling is you're welcome to sit at the table and join in the discussion. You just can't vote. So there are some options available. And Paul, do you have any Any preference there?
Whatever works best. I mean, I have been able to watch on Zoom meetings, so I do, just to listen to it to see what's going on. But if there was an opening, I'd be willing to step in and participate. So if everybody's happy with being on there, that's fine.
Mhm.
I thought about this alternate idea last night in the middle of the night. I know Sylvia, you mentioned sometimes it's hard to make meetings. We have vacation times. The bigger issue for me is about, are we able to get a quorum? And I'd like to be able to have that ability to say, hey, I'm gonna be on vacation this meeting, Paul or whoever else, can you fill in? So at least we can have the business kind of continue. And I know you've had situations where you just felt like, it could be a stretch sometimes, so.
Yep.
That's where that idea came from.
Another possibility too would be to add an additional member to each one and have it be 6. And I know people don't always like even numbers when it comes to votes, but I don't feel like we have a whole lot of contentious votes, to worry about necessarily. I mean, maybe that could happen, but that would be another possibility, is to broaden it to 6 members instead of 5.
Yep, and we do consider them open meeting act meetings, so having a number of board members there is not a problem.
Right. Yep. I like the alternate idea. If we don't make it bigger, I like that idea, because there have been times when we're like, are we gonna have enough,
Right.
So
Mhm.
that's a good idea.
And that way you can be proactive with it. And say, I'm gonna be on vacation or I'm not able to make it. Okay, can you make it for me?
Mhm. Well, Paul, would you be willing to serve as an alternate on Finance Committee? Sure. Okay. How about PQI? Would someone like to serve as an alternate on PQI?
I can do the alternate.
Okay. Then if that's the case, I would ask the board for approval for appointment of the committee members, as I've stated. And I do think it's appropriate for the board to approve any appointments where there's a change. And I'll look for a motion.
Motion.
Support.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor, should that be a roll call or just voice vote? Voice vote. All those in favor of the motion respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And we will ask the committees to re-elect a chair at their next meeting, since we're talking about changes and assignments. And hopefully we'll be able to do this concurrent with our April meeting next year, so everything synchronizes with that. And any other general information, comments, or meetings attended from board members?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet with Alyssa Heckwater, who is a facilitator for the National Alliance of Mental Illness and NAMI. And she just provided some information that I'll have here for the peer-led support groups and the family-to-family support groups that they have for family and friends of adults with mental health conditions. She's going to have a 7-part series of family to family that she'll facilitate starting in October. And it's capped at 20 people. And I'd be more than happy to send the link to all the board members after the meeting. So if you know families that could benefit from having some support in managing their family dynamics relative to mental health conditions, it's a great resource. And there's some pamphlets here as well. So just wanted to point that out.
Anyone else have any comments, meetings attended, information? Then we will open the floor for public comment one more time. Do we have anyone online? And if that's the case, absent